Hi everyone, so welcome to the next in our author interview series. This is another interview that is connected to our conference, My Poor Devil, and the Queering Heyer panel. So I'm really excited today to welcome KJ Charles, who is an author that I'm sure many of you have read or have heard of. And I'm just going to hand over now for her to give an introduction to herself and her work a little bit, just in case there's anybody that hasn't read it.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me. So I'm KJ. I write mostly historical romance, mostly queer. I've been writing for about 7-8 years now, and I've published in the region of 25 books, give or take. I have written a number of Regencies, but I'm also quite big on Victorian, the Edwardian, and I've recently completed a 1920s trilogy. So I do like to range around in the time period a bit. I like writing books often with an element of fantasy, sometimes with crime and mystery. My latest trilogy was sort of Golden Age pulp adventure, which I'm enormously fond of. Some of you who are Heyer fans will obviously recall that she divided her time between the Regency romances and the Golden Age detective fiction, and I appear to be doing something along those lines. And that is basically me. Unless you need anything more on that.
No, thank you. I think that's a good introduction. You've got lots of different book series, and you've sort of mentioned a couple of them there. If you could pick sort of 3 different series that would give people an idea of kind of the width of your production that you could just introduce quickly. I don't know what they would be, but by era or by topic, whichever you prefer.
Well, I guess I'd say start with the Charm of Magpies series. My first book, The Magpie Lord, is a paranormal Victorian. It's set in a sort of alternative Victorian world with magic, and that, you know, launched my career kind of thing. And it's got quite an intense magical element. There's a sort of poverty-stricken magician and an aristocrat who doesn't have magic himself, although he is a conduit for magic. And there's lots of magpies, and there's an awful lot of violence and a bit of body horror, because I like doing things like that. So I think that's quite characteristic. It's so characteristic of me. I still use a magpie as my logo. So I think that's my identifying series. My next one, which I wrote rather as a kind of riposte to Heyer in some respects, was the Society of Gentlemen trilogy, which is set at the end of the Regency, at around the time of just before the Peterloo Massacre, then going through the period of the 6 acts, which is these incredibly repressive and awful acts that prevented people from combining and from defending their rights, or the rights they didn't have, or fighting for the rights they wanted. Extraordinarily oppressive. And going on to the death of the old king and George IV taking the throne. So it's kind of a counterweight to the sort of popular Regency image of balls and silks and whatnot, partly because it's queer, but very largely because of the politics. So at least 2 of the relationships are very much across a class divide there, and I think that's something that I think is quite important in my work: class and interrelationships. And also I sometimes like playing in Heyer's sandbox and doing books very much in that sort of glittering aristocratic world, but I also like not doing it, because, you know, it's not really true, and even if it was nowhere near the whole truth. So I think that's quite important. And then for 3rd trilogy, I'm going to have to go with the Will Darling Adventures, which I've just finished, my 1920s, because I'm really fond of them and I'm really happy I finished them, but also because 1920s is tremendous fun. The pulp adventure, all the elements that people like Heyer and her detective phase use, the the detectives and the criminal gangs with sort of funny names and people zooming all around the place in fast cars, and ladies in very short dresses and so on and so forth. And that's just immense fun to roll around in. So I think those 3 sum me up in different ways.
Love it. Thank you. I mean, I sort of opened the Will Darling first book, and obviously he's in a bookshop, and it was like, oh, this is exactly accurate. So I loved all of the series, but I have a particular place in my heart for that one, because I was like, I feel this book selling.
Yeah, the thing is, as readers, we all love books, but there is a kind of awfulness as well to books in large quantities that I think sometimes goes unacknowledged. There's a line in Think in Slippery Creatures where he says that one book might be like a bee and it's buzzing around and landing on flowers or whatever, and then you get a load of them together and it's a terrifying swarm. And that's very much a feeling I have had working in publishing. There's a certain critical mass of books where you just start to get worried. Yeah, Terry Pratchett, there's enough books together and they basically become sentient, and I sort of know what he means.
I think that's fair. I mean, working in a secondhand bookshop, I've definitely been buried a couple of times.
Yeah, very much. Well, I knew that I used to work in publishing, and I knew that I had to leave when I let myself into the office, because I was always the first person there, totally on my own. Let myself into the office the back way, all these books on one side and the other, and I walked in and the words, God, I hate books, just came out of my mouth. Completely unexpectedly, aloud, which is slightly unnerving, and the words sort of rang off the walls, and I thought, might be time for a career change.
Yeah. So, I mean, I feel like that's a sort of question that I've never asked you, and I'm sure you've talked about it before, but what was the process of becoming a writer for you? And were you writing before but just not trying to publish, or was it you sort of made a decision to go into writing and you used all of your publishing experience?
It was sort of punctuated equilibrium, because I was an editor, and I'd always liked the idea of writing and had stories in my head. And I wrote two novels that obviously didn't go anywhere, sort of starter novels. And then I had children, and nothing happened in my brain for some time, obviously, because it's really stressful and they don't sleep. I had two quite close together. And then I got an idea for a book which turned into The Magpie Lord, and I just really wanted to try writing it and powered through to the end and sent it off to a publisher, and they took it, which was terribly exciting. And I then sort of had a sort of burst of inspiration and wrote 3 more novels fairly quickly, and which were all published, and they all did quite well. And then I was writing Jackdaw at the time, I think, and my husband basically said, look, why don't you just quit and do this full time? Because I didn't like my job. Publishing is grossly underpaid. All book work is underpaid. Publishing is grossly underpaid. They're never going to sort out the inequalities and lack of diversity in publishing while it's so underpaid, because people just leave. I had 2 children. I was commuting. It basically wasn't a big risk for me to take to quit right full time. And that's an absolutely absurd statement when you consider that when I told not my boss, who was great, but my boss's boss, when I said to her that I was leaving to be a full-time writer, she actually laughed. And that's like the head of a major publishing company thought it was hilarious that you might try and support yourself by writing full-time. And that tells you another lot about publishing, really, doesn't it? But that was basically it. I was really enjoying the writing. I wasn't enjoying the job. And so I thought, I will give this a go. But yeah, it was, I had about a 5-book overlap with my job, and luckily a boss who was very understanding. And then I knocked off, and I have been writing ever since.
I mean, you've got an amazing rate of production for these books. I can't believe you wrote 5 while you were still working in publishing as well.
That was one of them, Jackdaw, which I maintain is one of my best. It's a bit controversial because the hero of that book is the villain of the Magpie Lord trilogy. But I maintain that's one of my best. I wrote that in about 6 weeks, and that was out coming home from work and just writing in evenings. I was just obsessed with it, flying fingers kind of thing. I have to say my rate has slowed down considerably, but although in the last couple of years, anyone who can get a book out at all is doing pretty well. But yeah, no, I was working at sort of 3.5 novels a year for 3 or 4 years, which is a very satisfactory day. I don't know how people do 12 books a year. I swear to God, I really know how you can keep that up. But certainly I couldn't. More power to their elbows if they can.
Um, Obviously, there was a journey as well into sort of predominantly self-publishing, or entirely self-publishing. Are you entirely self-published at the moment?
I have been for a while. I've actually just signed 2 separate contracts. One I don't think I'm allowed to talk about yet, and the other one is with Sourcebooks, who are a large American indie. So they do a lot of romance novels, and I've just signed a 2-book deal with them to do Regency era with smuggling, which should be good fun. But yes, before then, I haven't been with a publisher in quite a long time. You know, there's a lot of ups and downs in indie publishing. So, you know, I was with Samhain and they closed, and I was going to publish with Riptide and they imploded, and I was with Love Swept, who's a division of Penguin Random House, which wasn't an entirely happy experience, and they've closed down. So basically, Typhoid Mary here. I'm hoping Source would survive my touch. But also self-publishing is terrific. I absolutely love it. I think the reason there's been such an explosion in, you know, diverse romance and you know, people being able to tell the stories they want to tell is entirely down to self-publishing. And, you know, that's actually proved to publishers that they, you know, the old excuses about, oh, it doesn't make any money, just don't wash. And also it's given loads of authors a chance to get their stories out and a chance to make a living, which is super important. So I love self-publishing, and I love the responsiveness. I love being able to control every aspect of things because I like to control every aspect of things. So yeah, it really suits me, and I'm honestly slightly nervous about going back to working with the publisher, although I have heard nothing but good things about Sourcebooks, so that should be quite exciting.
Cool. You said that you were writing with them, I think, another Regency set. So this kind of ties us back in with a bit of hairiness. Yeah, with hair. Sort of, I mean, you mentioned as well that your previous series had been sort of a bit of a riposte, and I know that you've got books, some of your standalones like The Gentle Art of Fortune Hunting and Band Sinister are quite connected to hair.
Yes, very much. They're very much in a dialogue with hair, I think, those two. They're both what I call my hair but gayer.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, definitely. I think Gentle Art of Fortune Hunting was the last one I read, and I was, you know, I was thinking Pharaoh's Daughter. Okay, it's going to be Pharaoh's Daughter, and then I was like, whoa, I don't remember this big in Pharaoh's Daughter.
Pharaoh's Daughter, and also there's a short story of hers in Pistols for Two, which actually I channeled that one in The Ruin of Gabriel Ashley a while ago. But yeah, there's a couple of hers that really lend themselves to adaptate. Well, there's more than a couple, really, aren't there?
Yeah. So there's this kind of relationship with her. Obviously, there's been some sort of influence and reading, and she's such a sort of influential figure in the development of Regency romance, but also this resistance and wanting to widen out the hair world. So what do you think of sort of her legacy at the moment, and what writers are doing with that legacy?
It's a really interesting question. I was basically, I say brought up, my mum didn't bring me up. My mum had all the hair books because, you know, she loved them, and I read them. I mean, I've read them multiple times. I reread frantically. I can still quote huge chunks. You know, I know The Unknown Ajax, for example, inside out. Absolute masterpiece of construction, that one, which so they were formative for me, and I was reading those before I read any other romance. Yeah, it was a sort of, in many ways I regard her as kind of, she is herself alone. You know, she wasn't writing in the genre, as we know, she created the genre, but she was she was magicking up this world. And yet, obviously, it's a deeply problematic world. It's a anti-Semitic world. It's an entirely white world, except for, you know, quite poor appearances of a couple of black characters. It's, you know, incredibly snobbish world. The class relations are horrible. Completely ignores a lot, huge numbers of the issues that were going on. It's it's in many ways the problems we have with historical romance now are problems that Heyer set out for us. You know, she laid the table and she just covered it in crap. And it is, you know, on the one hand, I'm not prepared to say, oh, well, you know, we should just throw her away because, you know, of all the bad things, because she was so formative, and also, you know, she is, technically speaking, tremendously good. On the other hand, you can't just ignore it. You can't just say, oh, well, it was the time, because, you know, other people weren't behaving like that at the time. So I think what we really need in this genre, we really need a very hard conversation with ourselves that constantly says, hang on, why is this good? Why is this the thing that people strive for? Why does it have to be a duke? What is this resistance to having people of colour where they ought to be? You know, actually taking long, hard looks at what we see is normal, which is, of course, the whitewashed, Christian washed, het washed, rich washed version of reality that Heyer presented. And, you know, we've got to actually go back and say, you know, that wasn't the case. I just think it was the case because Heyer told me it was the case, and I inhaled this stuff at a formative age. And, you know, you need to go back and rewrite that, is what I think.
Yes, no, I agree. I think that part of the fact that she's had such a sort of widespread influence is because her books are, as you said, technically very good. Many of them very, very enjoyable, very funny, linguistically.
Yeah, hugely linguistically inventive, great memorable characters. I think was writing a lot more interestingly than she almost let herself understand. There's all kinds of fascinating, especially queer coded characters and queer subtexts and so on, which a lot of it she put there deliberately, but I think there's so much going on under the surface and so much to play with. So yeah, she was in many respects an excellent writer, just with this rot at the heart.
Yeah, I think that's obviously part of the reason why she stays so influential, but not only influential in terms of people enjoying her, but in terms of the impact she still has on the genre, and also almost the hermetically sealed world that she created.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. It doesn't invite, you don't imagine, and then they went to America, you don't bring the outside in, and the books where she did make a little bit of a stab at bringing the outside in tend to be unsuccessful. You know, there is something incredibly seductive about the world she created, you know, with the balls and the glitter and the rich people and this circle of reality. It's something people absolutely adore, and you can see why. And we don't. I do know why people struggle to let go of that, but you know, we have to broaden it because it's overcrowded now. It's way overcrowded. And the number of times I have read, modern Regency romance, I think I've read it before. I know where you took this from, and I know where you took that from, and I know where you took literally that line and that turn of phrase from. And it's, you know, it's almost certainly unconscious because, you know, people just absorb things. But yeah, we have to push well beyond her boundaries. We have to make her boundaries bigger and claim them for ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much out there as well. Like all of the books that we've been talking about in this like series of interviews from different authors, like Rose Lerner and you and Kat Sebastian, Olivia Waite and Zen Cho, that are kind of expanding that Regency world and all of those histories that are going on that are sort of eclipsed out of Georgette Heyer's novels because of that tight focus on this rich, apparently oblivious world. But there's so much out there that's so fascinating and so weird a lot of the time as well. But you've sort of written kind of looking particularly at class, and is that something that you want to sort of continue exploring? I mean, the smuggling narrative, I imagine, lends itself to that sort of exploration.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, there's, there's huge, gnarly, exciting sort of moral difficulties and things to get into. But class is I mean, I'm British, obviously class is an obsession. But actually, class it's hugely important, and it's the big conflict that Heyer never tackled, really, which I think is funny, because obviously she wouldn't, because she was a massive snob, and she didn't want to do the, she was a governess and a duke. If she was going to do a governess and a duke, the governess would have had to, be of exceeding noble birth. Well, she wasn't she? Eleanor had to be in the reluctant widow. If she's being forced to marry a dying man because she's a governess and she has nowhere else to go, she blooming well better be really well born, and it was all her father's fault that he lost his money, kind of thing. She never wanted to go any further than that, whereas it was incredibly class. It was a time of massive class warfare. If we think we've got class war now, we have seen nothing. It was literal class warfare. The 1% were killing people, right out there, outrageously. So yeah, I think that's something that Regency novels have to take on, and I also think it's it's chewy and exciting and fun, and not something I can let go of, certainly.
Hey, I mean, I've told this to people before quite often, but I grew up on a weird triangular mix of Georgette Heyer, Bernard Cornwell's sharp novels, and Catherine Cookson. So you take something from all of them.
What would you call that? Gun, shawls and balls. Guns, shawls and balls.
Guns, shawls and balls, and yes, basically. So I was always used to like a historical world which included the poor.
Yeah. Well, that's it. If you don't have the Cookson, you don't get the poverty, do you? Well, I mean, you do the Bernard Cornwell, but yeah, you've got to have that element, and it's I'm slightly narked by how often when you get lower class, working class characters in historical romance, they're always criminals. Which is a bit, oh yeah, well, he's in the criminal underworld and he runs a gambling club, and he's a smuggler. I'm doing a smuggler, but I can assure you, my smuggler thinks he's absolutely in the right of things. But there's the working people. There was a wonderful trilogy that Samhain put out back in the day about people who were making a living as working artists. Tess Bowery, the first one's called Treading the Boards, I think. And they're basically all about people who work as musicians or work in the theatre, and they're actual people doing their job. And of course Rose Lerner does that wonderfully, but there's so few books where people are literally just working people who are doing their jobs, rather than either the highest of the high or the lowest of the low.
Yeah, and there's so many stories to be told. One of my sort of pet peeves is the aristocrat in disguise in the poor world.
Yeah.
Not the sort of moving around of class and awareness of class, but when it turns out that it was a hidden duke the whole time and he gets to escape and be a duke again.
I actually, one of the Heyers I like more is, oh god, now I've forgotten its name. It's the one where Gilly is the Earl and the Foundling.
Yes,
Isn't it? And he's sick of being a duke and he wants to be plain Mr. Dash of nowhere in particular. And he goes off and he has an adventure. And actually he discovers it really sucks and it's really difficult, and he goes back and he's delighted to be a rich duke with people to do loads of stuff for him again. And I actually really like that, because there's no sense there that this is a purer and more honest life. She's like, hell no, give me my wealth back.
Yes, I appreciate that as well. And I always appreciated Gervais, or Gerbet, I don't know how you're meant to say it, in The Quiet Gentleman, who also was like know I very much do not want them to take my money. Like,
yeah, no, I'll have the money.
this is a great life. Like,
very strongly of the opinion that being rich is better than being poor, and privilege is better than not having privilege. And I think it's, especially when you're talking about the massive divisions and the horrendous disparity in wealth and what that meant for your life. Frankly, you'd be insane, this idea of, oh yeah, I could be a duke, but I want to live in a slum. Are you mad? Are you mad? Yeah, I think any that sort of comes with you feel like that comes with a mental sort of asterisk footnote thing that goes, but they probably had like running water and everything. It wasn't that bad.
Yeah. then I read another Catherine Cooks and I'm like, oh no.
no, God, oh. Yeah.
Fair. So do you have, apart from the smugglers and the one that you can't talk about, do you have any sort of wish lists for any of your Regency or any other sort of historical period or event or topic that that you would love to write about in the future?
I have a couple, but I sort of don't want to jinx them.
Okay.
I've just been on holiday for 3 weeks, and one of the things I did was I've been roaming around the Lake District and Stonehenge, and we went to a place called Whitehaven, which has the most staggering secondhand bookshop. Michael Moon, I don't know if you've huge, it's amazing. It's just this absolute mad fest of just books, crazy amounts of like books. And we've got an enormous unpacked bag that weighs about half a ton in the hallway even now, and I've got basically about 3 or 4 things that are just sitting there begging to be the basis for a new book. So yeah, I've got more to write than I can shake a stick at the moment. But I do think, yeah, I've got a 1950s idea, sort of post-war seediness, and I have a plan for card sharps, which I'm quite looking forward to. Nice. So we shall see.
With the sort of the series that you've got on the go, obviously one of them particularly is unfinished.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No, it's fine. We're just the question just keep popping up every year or so for me is: Are you going to finish it? Do you think, or is it sort of on the permanent back burner?
I don't know. If I have, I'd love to finish it. I'd really love to, but I just thought myself into a corner. I got so tangled up in trying to approach the story from 15 different aspects, because I just backstory, I had written book 1, it was meant to be book 1 of a trilogy, and so book 1 comes to a satisfactory conclusion with the end of the romance. There's an ongoing story, and I've completely flaked on it, and part of the reason I flaked was that I was supposed to be writing it when everything started going to hell, and the problem was I was writing about a world going to hell at the time, so I couldn't find a way out of it without basically ending the world, which wasn't the way out that I wanted to go for a satisfactory romance.
It was Stonehenge, I was like, maybe.
Maybe, yeah. Well, we went to Stonehenge just to see Stonehenge, but yes, no, I don't know. I would love to finish it. I hate having let people down, but that was one of the reasons it took me 10 months to write Will Darling 3, but I just had to, because I'm not doing that to people again. I will never ever leave an unfinished trilogy again, I promise.
Are there any of the other worlds that you're thinking of returning to? Like I've got proper English here, but like think of England in proper English. Ones that are complete in themselves. It's not a series per se, but there's room to explore that world more, or the gentle art of fortune hunting.
There may well be something coming up which is linked to the gentle hearts of fortune hunting, which might be linked to the thing I can't talk about, but I couldn't possibly comment. I've sort of been playing a bit. This is another reason self-publishing is great. I've been playing a bit. So the proper English Think of England world is linked to the Will Darling adventures. They are the same world, just a generation on. I'm not planning to do more in it, although there is going to be an epilogue coming out that sort of ties up both Think of England and Will Darling. So that'll be coming out in September. I am planning a next, so my my Regency series, Society of Gentlemen, is linked to a series that takes place about 40, 50 years later called Sins of the Cities, which is linked to a series that takes place a generation later called the Lily White Boys series. And I've got a feeling that I'm going to do another one, which might be the grandchildren of some characters from the Lily White Boys series. So I might actually have 4 generations basically covering from about 1820 to about 1950 in the same world, which would be quite satisfying, and I might just have to do it just for the satisfactory nature of it.
It would be really cool. Love that. I'd love to hear sort of like the epilogue as well to Proper English and Think of England. Love to meet them again.
Yeah, I wanted to tie things up a little bit, and because I know a lot of people want a sequel to Think of England, but I actually don't think it would be right. I think it's fine as it is. And I did start one, but I like where I left them. I felt they had enough to be getting on with. There's some books where you leave it with a happy for now and you think, no, I've absolutely got to keep going on this, like the Will Darling Adventures book 1. I absolutely couldn't have left it there, although it's hopefully a satisfying ending, but it's very much the start of something, and they needed 2 more books to get to a happy ever after that I think people could believe in. Whereas in my view, Think of England, they might have only recently got together, but it's really clear that they're right for one another, and that's, no more need be said, I think.
Although I would love the further adventures of like the Himbo Berserker and
I know, but it would be self-indulgent, and I have other
fair enough. I thank you so much for chatting to me. We've covered quite a lot of ground. I have, I feel like very bravely kept back from talking about Henchmen of Zenda because I always make you talk to me about it. I will resist, but that is my top tip recommendation for people who've not read you before. Although I often then send off people on a whole journey where they have to read Prisoner of Zenda, but not Rupert Penshow.
Never read Rupert Penshow. Although I do think, I'm pleased with Henchmen of Zenda. I think it's kind of relevant to the conversation about Heyer, just purely because that's the most directly that I've engaged with another book. In my Band Sinister and Gentle Art of Fortune Hunting, I'm sort of going in and out of various Heyerian themes, whereas Henchmen of Zenda is very definitely me sort of planting my feet and looking Anthony Hope right in the face and saying, no sir, your drawbridge opens from the wrong damn side, what are you thinking? So it is, it was a fascinating exercise to do, and what I would really like to do, but I can't, is do a similar thing with Heyer's The Reluctant Widow, which I blogged about this. You can find it on my blog, but basically I have long maintained that The Reluctant Widow actually tells the wrong story, and the actual hero of the book is Francis Cheviot the sub. And if you actually look at the plotting, Heyer knew it, and the actual story all takes place off stage, and we just get to see these 2 boring secondary characters having a romance that doesn't actually matter. Well, all the action and all the good stuff and all the plotting and all the doomed romance and everything is happening in the backstory.
Francis, I know.
Yeah,
and one of my favourite Heyer characters.
So I really want to rewrite The Reluctant Widow as the story of the total hero who foils a spy plot and brings down the villains and all of this stuff, and give it a happy ending. But unfortunately, copyright laws.
So you have to wait however many years.
I don't know how old I'm going to be by the time that damn book comes out of copyright. That's the problem.
You could have it ready to go and then just
I could
straight
release it in a Samizdat version. I'll put it on AO3 or whatever. That's what I'd do if I could.
I mean, Francis Cheviot is Basil as well, but the evil. But I think of Basil and Francis as quite similar characters.
Well, they are. I mean, she liked her sort of feline queer characters, didn't she? She was very fond of them, loved them. But Francis is magnificent because he is, you're actually led to believe he's kind of villainous even when he's not being the actual villain. He's still totally amoral and all the rest of it. But he's so unequivocally the hero. And the only heroic thing that Ned, the hero of the book, does is literally to make the decision to get out of his way. he says, okay, I'll stop being in your way and I will stop obstructing you from doing what you need to do. And that's like, yay, big moment, well done.
Thanks. Yeah. There was one of the things, I don't know if you've seen the slightly terrible, I say slightly, entirely terrible film of The Reluctant Widow.
I haven't, no. I can't imagine why you'd pick, of all her books, why would you pick that one?
I mean, I'm presuming they were sort of riding the wave of the paranoid women's film, with all of the Rebecca and all of those kind of country house.
Yes, but it's not, but that's, I mean, it kind of ruins that because, she's not really got that much to be paranoid about.
Well, they add in all sorts of things.
Oh, good. You'd need to.
Like a smuggler that appears in the middle of the day at the window and is like, all right, love. He has an Irish accent inexplicably in the middle of Sussex, wherever they are.
Of course.
But they make Francis very, very het and very, very villainous. He's the proper villain of the film. And I was just like...
What? Well, what would you do that for? I mean, there's literally nothing notable about that book apart from Francis.
They added in all kinds of things to make it a sort of... what's his face, the main hero guy, had to go to the horse guards and get stripped of his rank because he was a soldier, and it was all a ploy. Who knows? There was a French lady who was seducing him and his mistress, maybe, who was also a spy, but came to that. It was just the weirdest thing you've ever seen.
Yeah, I mean, there's a way you might as well just have given it a different title and have done.
You'd have thought, yes. It's one of those where you think it can't be that bad, and then you watch it and you're like, oh, it was worse.
Oh gosh.
Worse than I imagined. But yeah, anyway, that's just a fun little extra. But so thank you so much for chatting to me and to us more broadly. And I'm going to wrap up with the last 3 questions, if that's okay. No pressure with these questions. Just the first thing that comes to your head is fine as well. But what was the book that got you into romance as a genre? Or, I mean, if you want to pick any of the other genres as well that you're kind of working within, whether adventure or sort of that weird fiction, horror-y, body horror that you've got in some of your works as well. What was the books that got you into your genre?
I'm profoundly influenced by Diana Wynne Jones, who I think for anything fantasy, she's probably at the root of that, because she wrote normal things. She and E. Nesbit write normal things becoming weirdly and deeply terrifying in the most magnificent ways for children. She's got a sequence of toffee coming to life and kind of melting on a radiator that gave me the screaming abdabs and still does. So those definitely. In romance, I mean, as I say, Heyer, I was reading Heyer before I had any idea it was romance genre. And actually, I didn't read a lot of romance apart from Heyer when I was younger, but when I started working at Mills and Boon, that was fascinating from that. So I think actually A Crash Course in Marion Lennox, who I think is one of the great sort of closed door romance writers that we've got, and I don't see her mentioned a great deal, and I don't know why not, because she's absolutely fantastic, and I loved her. She wrote a book that had me like crying so hard while I was editing it. There was like tears plopping on the page, and like there's when you wrote you edited in pen, and like my pen's all spreading all over the page because I was sobbing onto it. So yeah.
Wow. I don't think I've read Marion Lennox, so that's
well, a lot of people haven't, but I was there with her when she won a Rita at one of the RWAs, and she's a wonderful writer. So yeah, I find it surprising that I don't see her name mentioned more often.
One to look up for me. The next question is about sort of your contemporaries or predecessors, but what are sort of 3 authors that you think sort of either have or continue to influence you or inspire you in different ways in the work you're doing?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I've just had a really intelligent thought on that, which has now totally left me. 3 contemporaries. You know what, I'm going to say three people who I don't like them, or two people at least who I don't like them, but they're very, very good and I want to be as good as them, kind of thing. So for that, Alexis Hall and why is my mind gone completely blank? Talia Hibbert. I just had total brain. Alexis Hall and Talia Hibbert, who I think are just two of the absolute best romancers writing at the moment, and I just love their work, and I want, you know, I want to be up there, writing alongside, because they just do tremendously. And T. Kingfisher, who I absolutely adore. She writes sort of a little bit romance, probably more fantasy than romance, but she's got an strength and kindness and a really sharp edge and an absolute mastery of horror. And you know, I'd love to be her when I grow up. So I think there is a pronoun, yes.
I think it's interesting we keep kind of mentioning genre, and I think when you were saying about Heyer, and like you said, she was the first romance you read before you knew she was romance. I think there is an interesting thing that goes on with genre. Like if you've got a central romance, it's automatically considered romance, and then people put it in a small box that then doesn't contain it, in a very strange kind of sequence of events. And I feel like Heyer very rarely just writes pure romance. She writes across a number of kind of mixed genres, and I think you do the same really a lot of the time. And that's not to say that writing pure romance is less or different.
Writing pure romance is actually quite hard. That's one of the reasons I do other things, is because it's a real challenge to do a book that is basically just focused on two people, and you can keep the conflict going and support it the whole way through, and you know, keep the reader engaged with that. And yeah, it's really difficult. It's a lot easier if you've got people stabbing each other.
Yes.
You know, you're running out of them for the conflict, you know, bringing a guy with a gun kind of thing. So yeah, no, I think I greatly admire people who, Teresa Harry, she's really good at that. She has these just really, really person-focused conflicts, and they work tremendously well. But I find that more difficult, to be honest.
There's such a breadth and sort of, well, I was going to say breadth and width in the romance genre, or romance genres, I think possibly. But there's so much for everybody, and I find it a little bit frustrating when people assume that all romance books are the same.
Well, it's maddening, isn't it? I mean, no one ever says that all novels with a murder in are the same.
No.
You know, why? Oh yeah, all historical novels are exactly the same, starting with the prehistoric ones and ending with the ones set in 1950, but they're all the same because they're all historical. Misogyny, mumble.
The last question, which I know you're excited about, is about just sort of get an idea of your taste outside of reading as well. Are there sort of recommendations or just facts that 3 films or TV shows or other forms of media that you think kind of give an idea of your tastes or reflects your taste, or that you might want to recommend to people?
Right. I mean, basically, I live under a rock, and okay. Picking out of the air, I really enjoyed Lupin, the French series, modernising, and again, going, oh, it's themed. This is so themed. It's taking the Lupin stories of a gentleman thief and re-envisioning them in contemporary France with an African immigrant who uses the fact of racism to actually go unnoticed and duck under the radar and so on. And there's, you know, 2 of the police officers after him are Algerian, and it's really intelligent, but it's also enormously good fun. And the Omar Sy, I don't know how you pronounce it, the actor is just staggeringly charismatic. So the whole thing is totally worth watching. So yeah, watch Lupin, definitely, even if you don't like things with subtitles, because you'll just believe you know French by the end of it, because it's so engaging. So that's definitely one. That's the only contemporary thing I'm going to be able to give you. I am going to name Robin of Sherwood, as do you remember that?
Yeah,
With Michael Praed?
and the
Yeah,
soundtrack to it.
well, I can still hear the soundtrack in my head, and I was watching this when I was 12, which is longer ago than I like to consider. But it was, yeah, it actually occurred to me that is probably enormously formative for my imagination, because all drifting mists and incredibly good-looking men hanging around with swords and that kind of thing, and the Hunter mythology, and it played with a lot of mythology very interestingly, and I wish they put it back on telly because it was brilliant. And I should probably name a film. I'm going to say Casablanca, because actually Casablanca is probably my favourite movie. I watched it with the kids recently, and you know, it's not just obviously the wonderful romance and the fact that it's a romance within a setting where you're interrogating moral complexity, and you know, the politics come into it and so on. You've got the wider world that has to be taken into account, but also things like the Marseillaise scene, which, you know, remains in my view the greatest scene ever committed to cinema, because of what it shows was just people standing up together. And yeah, so I think Casablanca probably shapes my mind, shapes my attitude to everything a great deal more than it should. And Casablanca was meant to be a sort of trash B movie that they were rushing out. It wasn't meant to be a great piece of work. It was meant to be a piece of workmanlike genre fiction, and it's a masterpiece. So there.
There we go. I mean, it's one of the films that I don't usually teach film studies, but I've taught in survey courses where we do film, and Casablanca is one of the ones that comes up, and analysing the Marseillaise scene and how perfectly it's constructed.
Staggeringly.
It is. It's incredible.
I mean, I once went to see Casablanca on the big screen when they were doing a re-showing, and you know, God, I cried and cried and cried. You know, it's impossible not to. And especially, I learnt on Twitter that several of the actors, including, you know, the woman with the guitar who's singing and crying as she's singing, they're actually, the actors were refugees from Nazi Germany. So when they're singing, they're not actually just, then, you know, that meant, I think that's one of the reasons it comes across so powerfully. There is absolutely reality in there, and this sort of desperate defiance, and it's, yeah, wpretty
I didn't know that. That's amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, it really is. You're going to blub, aren't you? Because it makes me want to blub.
Yeah, pretty much. I'm a terrible crier, guys. What can I say?
Same.
But anyway, thank you so much for those answers, and thank you for joining us for the interview. It's been really lovely to talk to you, and to everybody watching, go out and check KJ Charles's website and books. I'll be popping the link below.
Oh, thank you very much.
And also come and join us at the hair conference. Also a link below. Well, if you're watching this in the year of our Lord 2021, then you can still come. Otherwise, it's in the past. I'm sorry. Anyway, thank you very much, KG.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.